been playing fantasy baseball since like 2002. My old roommate got me hooked on it. It's like I was the kind of guy's like, fantasy baseball, what's this for nerds? Who must do that? And never 20 years later, I've been hooked on it. So before I get into all the questions about fantasy baseball, what got you hooked on fantasy baseball?
Oh, I've been a fan of baseball since I was a kid. So my parents are, they immigrated from Russia. So I came over as a little kid, and obviously baseball isn't a big thing over there. And they had like a family friend, an older guy who I think in the time when I was a kid, he was already in his 60s or 70s, but he was a huge Dodger fan. He took me to my first game. And this is a little bit before the World Series. I think it was maybe like 86, 87. And I just got hooked, and he would just, kind of tell me all these stories. And he went to UCLA, I think his senior year or his freshman year when Jackie Robinson was still there. And so he talked about like, being on the field with him and stuff like that. So just a lot of great stories from him. He really got me into baseball. And then I just became kind of stats obsessed. So, ever since I was a teen, like getting these, the newspaper, like the LA Times every day, and just like, sorting the, home run leaders, RBI leaders, memorizing baseball cards. So that really got me into fantasy. And I started, I would say probably like late 90s, just playing in like, basic home leagues and stuff like that. This is when we were like, sending in our lineup changes by fax, stuff like that. So different world.
Speaking of your Dodgers, man, $1 billion spent on two players. What do you think about that when it comes to like their chances of winning the World Series this year?
I mean, they are in a great position to do it, but they've been in that position for so many years now. And what matters is, having it all come together and for them to be clutch when it really matters and to beat out some of these other good teams. Because, you just run into the wrong team at the right team at the wrong time, then you're in trouble. But they're obviously in a good position. They're set up a little bit better, I think, with their pitching staff, where they have some more depth. Like at some point, Buehler and Kershaw will be back. So if hopefully nothing happens to like, Glass now and those guys, but James Paxton isn't exactly, a big model of health. And so they have kind of that depth set up. And then obviously, Tani's is a big move for them. They got Kike Hernandez back, like little things like that, I think matter. Like he's good for kind of like just team energy and vibe. So I like it. I mean, I've been, we had the World Series in 2020, but then you've got everybody that's not from LA telling you that doesn't really count. So for me, it's been 30 years plus, years. So I'm really, hoping for it soon.
Well, full disclosure, I'm a Atlanta Braves fan. I grew up I'm a TBS generation kid. So like growing up in the 90s and 2000s, like every year was like we're always there. And I know how it feels about the Dodgers. Like every year they're great, but they don't win. But sooner or later it's going to happen unless they play the Braves. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, but Braves are amazing.
But let's get to talk about fantasy. And like a lot of drafts are coming up pretty soon. My personal drafts are coming up pretty soon. I have my first one next Wednesday. So I want to talk to you about draft strategy. And when it comes to how do you budget either through snake draft or auction draft, how do you go about budgeting your idea about budgeting your draft towards pitching versus hitting? And if it comes to like position scarcity, do you reach for players or do you let play come to you? So what do you think about when it comes to draft strategy for most players out there?
Yeah, so I'll start process pretty much like a few weeks after the World Series is over, and I start, with the player pool fresh. And at this point, baseball drafts are starting earlier and earlier. So there's already kind of like more, draft data out there. But, one of the things I do at FTN Fantasy is my own projections. So it's, they're the VDP projections, and I spend a lot of time in them, not only like on the teams and the players and the rate stats and projections themselves, but also coming up with like what the value is and finding those sort of like pockets of value at, per position, hitter versus pitcher split and stuff like that. And what I'm always looking for are like market inefficiencies, like where's the market way wrong on? Who are the players they're way low on, way over on? And so, the leagues that a lot of leagues I play, a lot of them are in like a national, like an overall competition. So in addition to the league money, there's overall prize money, and so you kind of have to be more balanced. Like you can't really punt a category because then you just won't have a chance for the overall prize. So I'm really big into the balancing, and specifically where I play mostly at the NFBC, there's you'll see pitchers kind of being a little bit more strongly valued there because the best ones really are so scarce. Like those top guys that can provide you really strong ERA and WHIP, the guys that could potentially be under 3.2 for a season, they're so far and few between that you really have to kind of prioritize those guys. And one of the things I've been figuring out this year is I feel like they're overly concerned with like getting those strikeouts early. Like they're afraid of like the George Kirby or, Max Fried type who may not necessarily, have a 30% strikeout rate, but they're so good with the ratios that I think that they're kind of being, undervalued. So to me, the pitching is obviously very important. I want to make sure that I have an ace, that I'm not like behind, with my pitching. And then like with position scarcity, I've had a lot of success with kind of just waiting on catcher for the most part. And the leagues I play in are 2 catcher leagues. And so, I feel like a lot of people are always, over the years, it's, trying to get the Buster Posey or the Real Muto or the Piazza back in the day, like the guys that really stand out. And that landscape has changed. Like you don't have the Piazza, like you had back in the day that was like a bona fide first, second round fantasy pick, 40 plus home runs or whatever. And so I feel like some of the early catchers are kind of pushed up too much in the name of position scarcity. And this year there's a good batch of catchers. I guess you could say they go in like the mid hundreds. And so it's guys like Gabriel Moreno, Logan O'Hoppe, Sean Murphy, Wilson Contreras is amazing. And these guys are, they're just, you can just pick them up kind of at any time in the middle of the draft. And so, people are kind of pushing up the Adley Rutschmans, and I don't think that's, exactly necessary. So I think catcher is the one position that people are kind of overthinking sometimes.
One position I always thought was overthought is closer, because that is a very hard position to do, because it's like basically only add one category in pitching is saves. Like everything else is kind of like whatever. But what are your thoughts about when it comes to like attacking the save category when it comes to relief pitchers?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the format. So I think in standard roto, I think it is good to kind of think about getting an ace or like an elite closer, but also depends on the this sort of the closer player pool that year. Like I remember a couple years ago where you had more where the committees started happening, and there was there were really only like 8 guys you could trust. There were a lot of question marks, and so people were taking a lot of chances. Now there seems like there's like a set sort of 12, 14 guys that seem pretty locked in. Like after Devin Williams, Edwin Diaz, and Josh Hader, there's still another 8 to 10 guys that are pretty solid. So I do want to usually grab one in the first 12, and then during the season we have free agent pickups, and so you can kind of try to get ahead of things by seeing a situation where maybe a closer might be losing their job soon because he keeps getting blowing saves, and another guy is emerging, so you kind of get ahead of that. But then like in a points league, points head-to-head league, that's where you don't have to prioritize the closers as much, or like in points formats, they're just a lot less valuable. So and then the other thing is, the elite closers are really helpful for ratios too. So, you look at somebody like Devin Williams and Josh Hader, who had, ERAs under 2, and they had, 80, 90 strikeouts in those 60 innings they pitched. I mean, that also, obviously it's not starters innings, but it still kind of helps you. It helps balance out some of the pain you might get by streaming those starters later who end up, sort of blowing you up.
And also when it comes to like relievers, I've been a big fan of the super reliever, I guess you want to call them, the guys who get like middle, like the long relievers. They get a lot of innings, they get a lot of strikeouts. They do, they get wins, they get holds, they get saves as well. Where do you focus on those guys when it comes to your draft?
Yeah, I think in a format where you have, what's been popular in the last couple of years are these saves plus holds leagues, where that's one of the categories, and so that's you can get a little bit more creative. And the good thing there is there's not a lot of I guess there aren't a lot of projections or just like talk about that category. So I think if you're in a league like that, you can have a real edge if you kind of do your homework in it and really kind of figure out who are those guys that are getting more than one inning. In relief, guys that are in high leverage situations that could, grab the win and things like that. So, like a Brian Abreu is somebody that kind of, comes top of mind. Houston's a little bit more crowded now because now they did get Hader. They still have Ryan Presley there. So, but, he's a guy that can go a couple innings, usually gets you a bunch of strikeouts. And there's a lot of sort of examples like that. Yenier Cano as well on Baltimore should be like a top sort of saves holds guy. And the same thing if like something happens to Kimbrel. I mean, that guy's, is getting much older, getting a little wild. It could easily be Cano taking over that job. No problem.
I want to go back to the hitters because you're talking about catchers earlier. I also noticed like middle infielders kind of like a thin position sometimes too. If you don't get one of the elite guys, what do you think about like the fact that some multi position eligibility when it comes to like guys like that, like Mookie Betts is going to be playing right field to second base. Do you think that those guys' value go a little higher because they are eligible to be used in several different positions?
I do, and like Mookie Betts, for example, that's going to be somebody that he's a top 5-6 pick, and he's a guy that people are going to be playing at second base for the most part. Because that position does get a little thin. It's really, second base, for example, is really top heavy. It's like it's Mookie, then you got to drop off. Then it's guys like Ozzie Albies, Marcus Semien, obviously is like every year playing 160 plus games. Altuve, getting older. These guys are solid, but then there's a sort of a really big drop off at the position. But the multi position eligibility guys, I think, are really helpful. You got somebody like Matt McClain on the Reds, he's second base, shortstop eligible in most leagues. So you kind of have that, that movement, that coverage. But then even I really like the guys that cross over between middle and corner infield. So, like Ha-Seong Kim on the Padres, for example, is a good example of that, second and third eligible. So if you do kind of, you're hurting and you got somebody on the IL and you maybe have a short bench, you can kind of move, in between some of those guys.
Perfect. And speaking of injuries, what are your thoughts about players who are coming back from injury this year? There's a couple of guys like I've had in my team before. Tristan McKenzie, who was in a lot. We also had guys like I guess Hunter Green also was like had some injury issues. So what do you think about those guys? Like they're young guys, so they still have time to bounce back because they get time. Young guys heal quicker because being older myself, I feel like if I fall down the my hip always hurts these days. Yeah. What do you think about like these younger guys, how quickly they can bounce back when it comes to like injuries like that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, with the younger guys, it's a lot better, easier. In the case of Tristan McKenzie, he's somebody that really pops up high in terms of like my valuation for him in fantasy, like just standard roto over where the market is right now, because I think people are, a little. They were, he obviously missed, most of last season, and the year prior he was incredible. I mean, the guy had a ERA under 3. Strikeouts were there. He pitches in a great, home park, great team context, good team guy, and he pitched just whatever it was, 6 innings, I think, beginning of last season, and or not beginning, but just part of last season, and they were rough innings for him. And so, one of the issues that fantasy people have is they're looking at the surface numbers too much and not like looking under the hood, right? And so now with somebody like Tristan McKenzie, I'm following him closely in the preseason. Like, he just pitched a sim game. He's he looked good today as we record today. He pitched, it looks good. So that's a good sign for me. That's kind of a notch up. I'm like, okay, I'm confident in my value ranking for him. I'm good to go there. Hunter Green has had, I'm less concerned about him because like obviously his stuff is elite. He's ready, I think, to take the next step forward. The issue with him always is the just the home ballpark, just because Great American Ballpark is really it's very hitter friendly. And so, when you draft Hunter Green where you do, he's pretty much an every week starter for you. And so, any of those Reds pitchers, it's always tough that sometimes they're pitching at home in Cincinnati, and it just depends on the matchup, right? There might be places like, if my Reds pitcher is facing the Braves in Cincinnati, I might be a little, scared to do that. But I'd be more confident in starting an ace type guy with upside like a Hunter Green from the Reds, as opposed to like, Graham Ashcraft or whoever who's not as talented.
Speaking of young guys, I play in a lot of dynasty leagues, and obviously we do what we have, like give a slot for minor leaguers. So do you follow the minor league guys and see how they're doing as well when it comes to like their projections? And is there any guys you see out there like who are in spring in camp right now? It's like that guy makes a team. He might do some damage this year.
Yes. So I do more so over the last few years, just kind of really in tune, because that's, that's where you're able to find the breakout players, right? Because the league, you think about 10 years ago when people are talking about like, oh, the peak of someone's, career or their fantasy value, it's like age 27. And that's changed a lot with a lot of the guys that have come into the league over the few years who are making impacts younger, like in their early 20s. And so we almost have to be more in tune to that when these guys are getting ready to come up. So no, absolutely. A couple of guys that stand out who, one guy that wasn't necessarily on my radar until recently is Jackson Merrill, who might make the Padres. But then one guy who I think deserves a shot more than he's getting right now is Jordan Lawler of the Diamondbacks, because the manager there, Lovolo, said that they were going to roll with Geraldo Perdomo. He's good defensively and everything. And then I believe I think it was like Elvis Andrus or Nick Ahmed, or they signed some veteran, which is sad to see for Lawler, who is going to make an impact eventually. He's going to steal a bunch of bases. He's is a future star, I think. And so they bring in the veteran presence. My guess is they'll probably want to kind of let him do his thing at AAA for a bit and just let him come up when he's hot and just hopefully crush it for the second half of the season.
It's funny you mentioned Jordan Lawler, because as I told Sterling, I work for his website called MLBBro.com, where we cover black and brown American baseball players, and he's one of our cats we cover a lot, and how he's one of those rising stars of the future. A couple other guys I sent you the list of we're talking about is like C.J. Abrams and Royce Lewis. Obviously, you talked earlier about Hunter Green, Tristan McKenzie, Will Benson for the Reds, who is a monster. If he ever got enough playing time, full playing time, he might do some damage. And out in St. Louis, Jordan Walker and Mason Wynn. What are your thoughts on some of those guys and how their projections lead for a good fantasy player to have in your roster?
Yeah, no, that's a good crop of players, and kind of like the future part of the big future in Major League Baseball. And there's a little bit of a separation with Abrams and Royce Lewis from the rest of the group in fantasy terms, because they both had massive breakouts last season, and they are they're like third, fourth round players. So like CJ Abrams, because he did it's like potentially 50 stolen base guy, and he had that massive season. He was basically like a very helpful for people to win leagues last season because of his amazing second half once he started leading off. He's like a very popular third, fourth rounder. It's like, somebody comes out of the first two rounds with, not a lot of stolen bases and maybe a pitcher, and they're like, wait, Abrams is perfect here. So he's, the type of player that kind of fits a certain type of roster construction. Royce Lewis, the only question with him really ever is just health. But we saw with his string of grand slams and everything last season, like what sort of impact he can make. And especially for that Minnesota team that's loaded, because if you get a full season of health out of Byron Buxton and you got, everybody else there around Royce Lewis, you've got yourself like a legit MVP candidate. So, those two guys I think are on a kind of high level by themselves. And then the other guys are basically this season, I think, kind of make more of a name for themselves. Will Benson made a big splash. He was very valuable in fantasy because, he was hitting, homers and stealing bases. And then for people that play in like on base percentage leagues or points leagues, he's pretty valuable in that format as well. Jordan Walker is, upside, I think, is really huge. I think he's one of those guys that's kind of being slept on right now because he did have he had the hot spring training, but then he had a good season, but it wasn't like full breakout. And so I think that's possible this year. And I think that's a guy people might be sleeping on. And then Mason Wynn, I think he's in a similar category as Walker. Of course, they're on the same team, but because he was doing so well in the minors that when he came up to the majors, he looked like maybe he's more of like defense only or, defensive strength guy, which he is, but he also has underrated, hitting tools and fantasy value. So he's a guy I think that can eventually hit for average, steal 25 plus bases. So I think he's someone that's become a target for me in drafts over the last few weeks, just for that reason. So yeah, I like that whole group.
And one more guy, Joe Adele is this guy. He's an enigma to me. He gets called up, doesn't do anything. Goes down to AAA, kills the ball, kills every day. Comes back up, doesn't do anything. Goes back down to AAA. Is he like just stuck in maybe like 4A level? Or like he's not quite major league, but he's not. He's better than too good to be in AAA. Like what is the deal with this guy? Is this only the year he finally puts it all together and becomes that fantasy stud that we all thought he could be?
Yeah, it's pretty wild because it feels like it's been, like we've been going through it for longer than it's been. I mean, he didn't even make his debut until 2020, the COVID year. He was only 21. People forget he's only 24 years old, so there's still a big chance for him. But he hasn't really ever been given a full chance. The Angels have been kind of shuttling him back and forth between the minors and majors. And yeah, you're right. When he does go down, I mean, he dominates the minors. There's really nothing else for him to prove there. So I think there's an, absolute chance for him to be, a really important part of the team. I think the one thing that he needs to sort of work on, or what people are concerned about with him from a fantasy perspective, is the high strikeout rate and low batting average. But other than that, like the raw talent with, the power, speed upside it's all there. And all I think he really needs is a chance. He just needs to just let him play, every day. And I think we'll probably see good things from him finally.
And last thing for me is like, there's always this one, I guess you say, pet peeve about fantasy that gets people a lot. Like for me, I hate when people aren't active in either trades or free agency. They draft and then you don't see them, to the end of the season. So what is like one of those moments about fantasy sports in general that get you like, what is wrong with this person? Why are they doing this?
Oh yeah, I have an easy one there. That's I do a lot of during the preseason, like January through March, I do a lot of these slow drafts. And, it's like a 2-hour clock to make your pick, or in some cases 4-hour clock. So what really irks me is the people that like milk that clock, and especially around spring training time, like just waiting for some news to hit. And the worst is if they're at the turn. So if they have like, it's a 12-teamer and they got the 12th pick, they're milking both of their picks and just kind of making everybody wait. It's kind of like not in the spirit of, of being respectful. So I think that's probably the thing that bugs me the most in the preseason.